An elderly English gentleman named William Shakespeare, who was the first person to receive an approved COVID vaccine, has died. He actually died over the weekend, but he only just now finished his death soliloquy in impeccable iambic pentameter with rhyming couplets.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is condemning Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments comparing vaccine requirements to the Holocaust. McCarthy says he plans to take the harsh disciplinary action of not liking her next tweet.
While visiting a Ford plant in Michigan last week, President Biden got to drive an electric F-150 pickup. In related news, a massive traffic jam near a Ford plant in Michigan was caused by an elderly man driving an electric Ford F-150 pickup with the left blinker left on.
I love it.
Good tag. Insiders say Biden sharpened his tone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on a recent call, but it was hardly effective since Netanyahu doesn't understand the meaning of codswallop, shenanigans, or malarkey.
They don't translate into Hebrew very well. Upon meeting an elderly Polish woman who survived the Auschwitz concentration camp, Pope Francis kissed her tattoo. The woman told reporters that she and the pontiff did not exchange any words, and it was a silent interaction. The Pope is expected to be forced to resign by noon tomorrow.
Lego released an LGBTQ themed set. It might be tricky to assemble at first if you don't already know which part goes where.
Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko has defended his decision to intercept an Irish Ryanair airliner and forcing it to land in order to detain a journalist who had been critical of him in the past. You know, anyone complaining about his treatment clearly hasn't flown Spirit Airlines.
Lollapalooza will return at full capacity this summer, but it'll actually be well over capacity since most Americans are now 20% bigger.
And finally, Texas executed its first death row inmate in 10 months. It figures Texas would bring executions back before Costco samples. Welcome to Biden Time. As always, I am Christian Bladt, and joining us is my fellow mirth maker, Tamra Brown, and a return guest to this show, although it's the first time on this iteration of the show, Royal Oakes, KNBC TV legal analyst. Is that still the best way to how should we let people know where they can find out more about you?
KNBC is great, Inside Edition is great, KABC Radio, and also podcast. My son and I, Connor, do a podcast, Too Many Lawyers, so everybody should check that out.
Great name.
Is Deborah Norville still doing Inside Edition?
She absolutely is.
For somebody who got really jobbed out of the Today Show, she's had that. She's done it longer than Bill O'Reilly. Much longer than Bill O'Reilly did it. So
absolutely, Bill O'Reilly, he wanted to do it live. If you've seen that clip,
sure did.
And so he's no longer with the show.
Yeah, he's doing something live. But we do appreciate. And look at this, Dominicus Saxon finally got in at the beginning of one of these. Welcome, and our friend Storage Yard resident never misses a show. He's up there in the Storage Yard in the North Country. Royal, we had you on the Trump Report a few times, and we didn't. I don't think we spoke during the real heat of the election season, and because we have someone with a legal background, I wanted to, before we dive into the current headlines and things, I wanted to get your thoughts on the handling of, just some of the reactions to the 2020 election. The fact that there were so many lawsuits, all of which were summarily dismissed. The fact that the Supreme Court was like, no, we are not having, we're not having any part of this. Do you feel that on the, from obviously you weren't in those hearings, did you get the impression that just there were just not enough merits to actually hear these cases? And would you have, advised the Supreme Court, like, you can't weigh in on this stuff? Or what were your thoughts as all of that was unfolding?
Well, there was no there. The allegations that Trump and his folks advanced, and everybody in the first few weeks, everybody basically right of center was saying, "Oh, give him a chance, give him a chance." You remember Al Gore? He tried to fight things to the court, took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But as the weeks dripped by, it became clear that out of 60 lawsuits, and who knows how many judges and lawyers involved, there was no evidence that the election was stolen. So all of those activities launched by Trump and his lawyers failed, and that's what made it so amazing and egregious and awful that Trump wouldn't let go. He had the bone in his mouth; he just wouldn't let go, and then that culminated in January 6th. So, bottom line is, it ain't over. The repercussions of January 6th, plus a bunch of other inquiries that we can get into if you'd like, against Trump, mean, he could well be facing criminal charges in the fairly near future.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of the current thing I wanted to. I felt like that was the next step to talking about the grand jury that is deciding what to do, and of course, he's saying that it's all politically motivated, which of course, things can be politically motivated, but you could also, they can also find things that are true. Just because somebody starts from a point of like, hey, I'm going to see if I can find some wrongdoing here, and hey, look, I found wrongdoing. And how serious are these charges, again, from what you're able to just ascertain from media reports and such?
Well, it's hard to know just how serious things might be for Trump, because I think the biggest vulnerability he has is financial improprieties in connection with his real estate properties. You may remember a few weeks ago, there was a big to-do over the fact that the New York Attorney General is teaming up with the Manhattan District Attorney on a criminal investigation of Donald Trump. And the specific basis, we think, is that when Trump was dealing with lenders, big banks, and insurance companies, he would say, look at my properties, they're incredibly valuable, because he wanted a big loan, he wanted a big insurance policy. But when he turns around and talks to the taxing authorities, he says, look at my properties, they're barely even there, they're underwater, they're not worth anything. And when you lie about the value of your property, that can be a very serious issue. It could be 3 to 5 years in prison on the federal side. It could be 5 to 20 years in prison on the state court side, New York State federal tax fraud law. So the fact that the folks who are trying to prosecute him have been able to get warrants issued means that they showed a judge there's probable cause that a crime was committed, meaning a reasonable person would suspect a crime has been committed. It doesn't mean that it's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt yet. That's for a jury to decide. But the fact that these warrants have been issued means that there is there with respect to the allegations against Trump. So we don't know how strong the case might be. We know the New York Times has just been grinding out these special reports over the last many months about improprieties regarding taxes and Trump and his people. It's very scary for Trump, I think, that the chief financial officer, longtime guy, right-hand guy in his empire, Weisselberg, is maybe going to flip on him. The feds are turning the screws on him. So we could see charges against him. And if a grand jury votes to say, yeah, there is probable cause, he should stand trial, then Donald Trump stands trial, and 12 people selected could send him to prison. Now, this doesn't even get into the issue of the hush money to Stormy Daniels, or did he incite riot in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, or down in Georgia, the DA in Fulton County is looking into whether the phone call was illegal. All of these things are hovering over him like really dark clouds.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite the same thing, but it's almost like, getting Al Capone on tax evasion. It's like, just get the thing you can get him on. Tamra, when you're evaluating and listing all of your many real estate holdings, I assume you've always been upfront and you've never tried to fudge, make it seem like, your Swiss chateau is not worth half as much as it's actually worth, right? Because you understand how serious these kind of problems can be.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have Giuliani as a lawyer, so
it's very unfortunate.
I don't have, I don't have the legal brain standing up for me that Trump has in his corner. Is Giuliani even still his lawyer? Does Giuliani deal with his real estate issues, or is there another lawyer that steps in for that? And by the way, I'm happy that I give off an air of somebody who has many real estate holdings. That is a reputation that I would like to have.
I just gave it to you, and you're shirking that reputation. I've invited. Who knows where you could have places?
All the way from.
Do you have a place in Tokyo that's near the Olympics?
To,
the Olympics that may or may not happen. Because Rudy Giuliani came up. what as you know, as someone who is an attorney, Royal, have you seen somebody do such damage to the talk about reputation, their life's work in such a short amount of time? I'm not even talking about the Borat movie. I'm just talking, I'm just talking about, I mean, God, America's mayor, I mean, I still lived in New York after 9/11. I was there for a couple more years.
Borat movie, the drippy
the hair dye.
I think he's got a lawsuit against the hair dye company.
He should,
the landscaping, Four Seasons landscaping.
Oh my gosh, that was just the funniest story of the decade.
I did love those guys.
Apparently the Four Seasons Hotel was where they thought they were booking this, and when they found out it wasn't booked, that instead they were in the strip mall, so the landscaping company, they chose to actually continue to have the press conference there. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, right next to the sex toy shop, like literally right next to it was right there.
To answer your question, Christian, I think I can't imagine a bigger fall than Rudy Giuliani, because, as you say, not only was he America's mayor and huge bipartisan support after 9/11, and I remember within a few weeks after 9/11, when Saturday Night Live went back for its first episode, they had him on there as either the host or a special guest. Yeah. And he had some wonderful banter with Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels said to him, "Mr. Mayor, is it okay to be funny again?" And he made some crack about, well, you haven't been funny before, so
his line was, I remembered, I talked about this in an interview with somebody about a book they wrote. Yeah, but he said, "Why start now?"
Yeah,
and I mean, that's he was like a media. I don't know, he's a media darling, but outside of New York, people kind of knew him as like, oh yeah, that guy who hosted SNL, and it's just it just so quickly. Yeah,
it wasn't only that though. I mean, I can remember I used to go back to New York in the '80s for business trips, and I mean, it was really grimy. It was really dangerous and a really rough area. And I'm talking about Midtown Manhattan, Times Square and so on. He comes in as mayor, and he really was the new sheriff in town who cleaned things up. And I guess not everybody agrees with him. Maybe some people think, oh, Dinkins was better than Rudy Giuliani. But I'm here to tell you, as somebody who regularly saw New York City in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, it was like night and day. I mean, it was totally safe. You felt totally secure. The crime rates plummeted. And he got the credit for that. But the business of the total obsessive, anything goes for Donald Trump has really, really wrecked his reputation and pushing. Apparently, he was the aggressive guy nudging Trump along throughout the period between the election and the inauguration to keep fighting. And now, of course, we see from a few weeks ago, they went into his apartment and his office in Manhattan. And what they're looking for is evidence that he broke the federal law that says if you're going to lobby for a federal government, lobby to the U.S. government, you've got to register as a foreign lobbyist, and he didn't. And that's the case they want to build against him, and he could be facing years in prison. And apparently, what happened is he really was pressuring the Ukrainian government to get the dirt on Biden, Joe, and Hunter. And at the same time, the Ukrainian government was pressuring Rudy to go to the United States government and say, get the ambassador to the Ukraine fired, the American ambassador to the Ukraine, the lady that Trump didn't like, get her fired. And ultimately, she was fired. And so the argument is Rudy was doing all this lobbying without registering, which is a federal crime. And so he's in a heap of trouble as well.
Yeah, and look, it's fairly far in the rearview mirror, but when we hear the allegations about Hunter Biden and the fact that there was allegedly this laptop, which the reporting of was highly suspicious, but then at the same time you felt like, why is Twitter banning the New York Post for posting a story about it? It was almost like the coverage of whether or not this laptop was something that was reliable turned it into a much bigger deal, but it's not something we hear about anymore. I mean, do you feel like there really was something, or was this just more of Giuliani's bluster trying to, keep the dogs off of him and point them towards somebody else?
I think it was bluster. I think if there was anything in that laptop that was really incriminating, that would support an allegation by Trump and his folks against any of the Bidens, it would be hard to keep that secret. The fancy computer experts
Alex Jones would have had it.
Exactly right. I think a more serious issue that, obviously the nation, the world focused on, and it didn't seem to resonate with people. But the more serious issue was the fact that this energy company takes Hunter Biden on at, $300,000 a year or something as a board member when he has absolutely no qualifications, no background. His dad, was vice president. So of course, I'm sure this happens a lot in corporations. You want to have influential people on the board members, but it's so transparent. But then for Joe Biden as vice president to swoop in and say to the Ukrainian leaders, I want this prosecutor fired. And if he's not fired by the time I get on the plane in 4 hours, then you're going to lose $1 billion in aid or something. And this was a prosecutor who, for a time, was going after Hunter's energy company. Now, all of that kind of smells. It doesn't sound good. Now, when it was trotted out as a big issue, everybody who was for Biden poo-pooed it. Everybody who was for Trump made a bigger deal out of it than it should have been and exaggerated the strength of the evidence. But the fact is, on its surface, it sounds and looks very weird. But as I say, it didn't resonate, and I think it's in our rearview mirror. And the laptop thing, if there was evidence in there, we would have heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that was the most telling thing. By the way, Tamra, you are registered as a foreign lobbyist, or are you still filing the paperwork?
No, not anymore. I had to give that up due to my TikTok status. I couldn't.
Liechtenstein's check bounced. Was that what happened?
Well, that's the problem, actually, because TikTok is banned in China, and you were lobbying the Chinese government. And I've
got quite a resume.
Do you need to take time to condemn John Cena for saying that Taiwan was a country? Because I don't want you to be in trouble with the Home Office back in Beijing.
But by the way, because we mentioned the Twitter banning the New York Post article, I just want to point out, because whenever Twitter is accused of being biased in what they are banning, it's always goes back to that. They're not banning it because it is a conservative point of view that they disagree with. It's because there's a specific element in it that violates, their terms of use, and that article contained like personal information that you can't have any personal information, email address and things like that. So that was the grounds that it was initially banned, and then a couple days later they brought the links back once they were fixed.
Right.
So just clarifying, because I always have to stand, whenever the right claims censorship, there's always, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. There's a specific reason. It's not just because we disagree with your point of view.
Unless your movie theater's on fire, then you can yell it.
Then you can yell it.
Exception.
Just to circle back for a second, Dominica Saxon, in terms of 4 seasons total landscaping, I feel bad about the married guys in the sex shop that couldn't leave until the cameras were gone. Sounds like you were there that day, Dominica Saxon. That must have been a lot. There were cheesesteaks to eat, and you couldn't leave until the press conference was over. But let's be fair, it didn't last that long. So yeah, I think that it's interesting because our regular co-host Scott, who is occupied today, he whenever the idea of Trump running again in 2024, the first thing he always says is, well, he can't run because he's going to be in jail. And I mean, it's something that he says somewhat tongue in cheek, but I mean, it's very possible that I mean, without having anything to do with all the other stuff, the potential things, the more bigger ticket items. Since we were talking before about January 6th, someone who is very much tied to that event is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we tend not to try to give too much oxygen to, but boy, she uses up a lot on her own. And it's more in terms of, the comments comparing mask wearing, to the Holocaust. You're not finding anyone who's agreeing with her. I mean, she was trying to get into a Twitter argument with Ben Shapiro, which I think somebody probably had to pull her aside and explain, Ben's background to her, that no, he's not. The Holocaust is not something that Ben is going to take lightly. And even Kevin McCarthy. I mean, I know Tamra had a joke about it, but honestly, for him to not like one of her tweets would actually be kind of impressive. So it really lends itself to where does the Republican Party see itself now? But what's the way forward? I mean, the governors had their Governors Association, Republican Governors Association, had a meeting earlier this week, and my pillow guy Mike Lindell was turned away, which I think is a great first step to have Mike Lindell turn around. He was apparently there last year, but that was a different year. 2020 was definitely a different year. So, or maybe he might have even been there in 2019, but that's not the point. Anyway, so I think that that's a good step. What do you do when you have somebody, when you're in a leadership position, or you're more of a moderate, and you have somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene that obviously we're talking about her. Plenty of people are talking about her, so she knows what she's doing. How do you think that they deal? Let's just talk more about the tone before we tackle what they do about being tied towards Donald Trump, Royal.
Well, I think the tone has to be a stern rejection of anything closely related to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is such a toxic combination of three things. First, she's stupid. She clearly, buys into conspiracy theories. She's a QAnon person. She doesn't engage in critical thinking because she probably just can't. Second, she's biased. So, whatever your intelligence level is, some people are just, they don't really care about politics, or maybe they're super left or super right. She's super biased on the right. So now you've got the stupidity and you've got the bias. And the third element of the toxic soup is ambition. She obviously, she's in Congress now, and she's not going away, and she's, making these ridiculous statements. And it's good that Kevin McCarthy came out and was sort of rejecting what she said, but it was a pretty lame rejection. He wasn't very stern about it. I think the bottom line is that if Donald Trump isn't in jail in November 2024, the Republicans are probably stuck with him. Because when you have a 81 million to 74 million vote, Biden to Trump, that means 74 million people thought Donald Trump was just fine to vote for. And even though, let's say 20 or 30 or 40 million of those voted holding their nose, that still leaves 20, 30, 40 million Trumpsters. And so if he wants to run, how is this any different from the spring of 2016, where he ran and 10 other people ran, and they split up their chunk, and he's got his chunk? He's going to steamroll everybody. And now, why is it going to be any different in the spring of 2024 if he's not behind bars? Because so far, I don't see any progress on the part of the Republicans to taking this guy down. I mean, when Joe McCarthy was revealed to be a demagogue in 1954, he went from 60, 70, 80% approval by the Republicans down to zero. He was censured by the entire United States Senate. And in a few years, he was dead from alcoholism. They took care of their Joe McCarthy problem. I don't see any steps by any Republicans taking care of the Donald Trump problem. So I think the answer is prosecutors in Fulton County, Washington, D.C., or Manhattan are going to have to do it for them.
What do you think, Tamra? You feel like there really would need to be
Marjorie Taylor Greene 2024. I think that's what needs to happen, because it's going to really excite, the evangelical right conspiracy theorist base. They're gonna love that, and it's she won't even be able to garner the as many Republicans as Trump did. So
I think he's much better on television than she is. So
for Democrats, I think all Democrats should be trying to champion for Marjorie Taylor Greene to be the Republican candidate.
Well, so here's a trivia question for you guys. What does Marjorie Taylor Greene have in common with presidential assassins? The answer is 3 names.
3 names.
Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth. And I didn't realize this till somebody pointed it out to me a few years back. I said, gee, what's the deal? Why are we always calling these guys by their 3 names? And they said, well, it's because there are all these innocent Lee Oswalds walking around.
Oh.
We don't want to sully their reputation, or the John Booths of the world. You know, they don't want that kind of baggage.
Wow.
And so, you know, serial killers, the rest of them, that's what we do. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, obviously, we're looking ahead. We realize how bad she is. We're giving her 3 names prematurely.
You make me realize now we should know Charles Manson and Ted Bundy's middle names.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Because those names are fairly common. I mean, they probably not anymore, you know. But you know, Tamra, there's obviously this push, you know, mostly amongst Democrats to censure Marjorie Taylor Greene, to remove her. Do you think that that's actually problematic in the sense that it could do more damage? You know, you could really make her a martyr, and maybe that's even what she wants. Not that she doesn't want to.
Is what she wants, because here's the thing: a large mission of the far right at this time is to be martyrs, and that stems from the evangelical point of view, because such a big part of the evangelical Christian religion is martyrdom, is to show that you have sacrificed yourself for your real beliefs, and that is just such a significant principle to people that belong to this party, that is why, you know, the explosion of condemning cancel culture, and Fox News's, you know, main thesis is that our viewers are persecuted just for trying to, you know, love your country and love your God, and you're having to be persecuted. Any time that they are made to feel that they are martyrs, oh, that's what they glob onto it, and they love it, and they hold it dear. So because Marjorie Taylor Greene, that, you know, stands on the platform of martyrdom, that is exactly why the people who love her. And if she's able to, you know, exploit that even further, I think she could get even more support from, you know, maybe more moderate Republicans who do feel that they, you know, well, I do at least relate to her. Maybe, yeah, she could be a little crazy, but, you know, I do have to put my weight behind this poor martyr who's standing up for what she believes in. I mean, that is a much larger part of what the Republican Party leans on.
Well, you know, I mean, go ahead, bro.
I was just going to react to your point, Tamara. It's interesting. I've been, you know, thinking about politics for all these years, and I've never actually had that thought. But you may well be right. There may be sort of a theological, political nexus connection between the evangelical approach and the political approach in terms of persecution. I will say, though, listening to you making that point, it did strike me that on the left, there is a lot of talk about people being victims, whether they are LGBTQ or racial discrimination or any other sort of demographic slice. So maybe it's sort of a universal thing where political folks do appeal to people knowing that it's a very deep-seated, solid notion that we are victims, we're being persecuted, and that's a solid reason to vote for, you know, a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, the only difference that I would say is that the martyrs are proclaiming victimhood, whereas on the left, they're being called victims by people who disagree with what they're saying. I don't think anybody who's trying to bring awareness to any sort of marginalized issue would identify themselves as victims. They would really not want that. It's usually I think it's usually the ones that are, you know, saying, "Oh, you have to be such a victim." It's the critics of it that are calling them victims, I think.
What I was going to say before is that, you know, I think what it ultimately comes down to is that, you know, a lot of people, at least in 2016, voted for Donald Trump because it was the not Hillary vote. And so if Marjorie Taylor Greene were to be the nominee and it was the not Biden, or if you're a cynic out there, the not Kamala Harris vote, if that was the not Democrat vote, people would be like, well, I guess that's who I'm voting for, because and people who didn't love Joe Biden are like, well, that was the not Trump vote. It's like nobody in the right mind is going to actually vote for a third party, because that you might as well just not vote, even if it's already pre-stamped and been mailed to your house. And look, case in point, Marjorie Taylor Greene would have one vote. He's seen her on Real America's Voice Network, and she seems to be all right. Now, the question for a Storage Yard resident, though, is it just in comparison with the other people on the Real America's Voice Network? Because that sounds like maybe a notch down from Newsmax, and I've seen they've got Sean Spicer. And then, the sort of the A-list talent is all sort of right there at the top of the pyramid with Sean Spicer. So I'm just wondering, maybe she's just great on television there. But Storage Yard resident, you're a Trump fan. You can't compare the way that she conducts herself on television and the way that Trump can make people laugh who even hate him. So I mean, there's a skill to what he does.
People who hate him, he can make people laugh.
Did I say all the people who hate him? There's times where he just says the I mean, when he was in
I think they're laughing at him, not with him.
In the debate with Hillary, when he just chimed in, "You'd be in jail." A lot of people laughed who were never going to vote for him. I'm just saying there are moments. The guy knows how to jump in, and although he didn't handle himself well in the debate, but anyway.
Christian, you mentioned Sean Spicer a minute ago. Did you say he's an A-list talent, or did I misunderstand?
On Newsmax.
Oh, on Newsmax. Oh, okay,
he's one of their A-list talent.
Yeah, because once you've been on Dancing with the Stars, I think you're disqualified as being an A-list talent.
Yes, which I of course had to turn down Dancing with the Stars because I'm also registered as a foreign lobbyist, and I can't really go into the details, but it hurt. I would have loved to have been out there with Alfonso Ribeiro, but anyway. So yeah, I think that it is very interesting because look, you have the people who, bit their tongue during Trump and then spoke up a little bit after January 6th. And then it was kind of right back to, Mitch McConnell plays a very long game, very slow, painstaking, sloth-like game. But, it doesn't behoove him to speak out against Trump, beyond what he did after that. And Kevin McCarthy thinks he's going to be Speaker of the House, so he doesn't want to turn anybody off. But there does come a point where there will be there's a moment where it's like, are you all in on Trump and are you not? And I think, Royal, you might be right. If it has to be 2024, it might be 2025 until they have to say, all right, sorry.
Yeah, and a few things, of course, are going to happen in between. And the critical thing that's going to happen is the off-year elections of next year, 2022. I was looking on Wikipedia to figure out just how bad it turns out to be usually for the party in power in terms of House of Representatives seats. And it's huge. Since World War II, in the first off-year election after a president is elected, the party in power, who's just won the presidency, loses an average of 28 seats. And the only two times since World War II where the party in power didn't lose some seats were two things. When Bill Clinton was impeached by the GOP and the voters didn't like it, and so they actually bumped up the Democrats by 5 seats in the next election after the impeachment. And with George W. Bush, the son, after the 9/11 fervor, then his party did well. They bumped up a few seats. But other than that, you could be looking at a huge loss for the Democrats. And so Nancy Pelosi will be out of a job. She won't be speaker. The Republicans will run the House. The out of power party usually picks up 4 Senate seats. So the Republicans could theoretically control both the Senate and the House again after the 2022 elections. If that happens, the Republicans are going to be looking around and saying to themselves, whoa, or if even just one of those two things happens, they might be saying, well, gee, did we do so well because Donald Trump's not so bad after all? Or are they going to say we did well in spite of Donald Trump? So I think there'll be some soul searching by the Republicans after the 2022 elections to decide whether they want to go crazy again and pick Donald Trump in 2024. If he's
right, and of course, at which point, especially if they have both the House and the Senate, then they can instill the bravery that Donald Trump called for and not certify the election. If so, and who, regardless of who's running, they could still decide to do that. So I feel like that's a very real possibility. All of that. And then that could be sort of a result there.
I think the fact that Democrats know what could be over the hill in terms of the House and the Senate, that's why they are so desperate right now for these 2 golden years when they run the presidency, the House and the Senate, to make really significant progressive changes. Let's make the DC a state. Let's add 4 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court, Green New Deal and so on. They are really pushing so hard on these things because they know it could all disappear in just a little while. It's interesting to me, you mentioned Kamala Harris. About a month or 6 weeks ago, all we heard about was this is the Biden-Harris administration. The order went out from the White House to all the federal offices. You refer to the Biden-Harris administration every time that it's mentioned. And yet, I don't know if the two of you have noticed or had the same observation. I don't see them pushing that much anymore. It seems like they decided that's not on our agenda or not. But I think some people suspect that the Democrats who are the powers behind the throne realize Joe Biden, because of his age, just may not be in shape to run for re-election. So they want to get the American public used to the idea that Kamala Harris is a substantive person who is ready to step in and take the top job. And that probably was why they were insisting to everybody in the world, refer to this as the Biden-Harris administration.
I think I hadn't thought about that at all, and definitely didn't think about it. But now that you say it, it's almost like I got years ago in his book, Al Franken wrote that when it was paired up Hannity and Combs, that Hannity's name should have been in a very large font and Combs in a very, very small font because of what he actually contributed to that show. So maybe just show business superstardom has gone to Biden's head. His expertly plugged head, by the way. I think that's
you can hardly tell.
yeah, exactly. But you mentioned it, and it is one of the things I wanted to talk about. There is this notion of what Democrats are calling expanding the Supreme Court, what opponents are calling packing the Supreme Court. And if you can take sort of the politics out of it, if you want to talk about it in a way where it's not even if this administration did it, it's like you can do it if you can get the votes for it, right? I mean, it is something you can do. What do you think about it? Again, if you can just in sort of like on the sense of the law, not so much about Biden doing it. We can certainly chime in on that. But in terms of the actual process, do you feel that it's a mistake to add justices just because there's, for all the things that Trump did that conservatives didn't like, he did get 3 justices on the Supreme Court that I think that they're somewhat fans of.
Yeah, trying to be objective about it, it is unsettling, the idea of making a significant structural change that was last made, I think, in like 1868, namely the number of the U.S. Supreme Court justices. And the idea of the motivation being, doggone it, is just tilted too far right. The crazies are in charge. Clarence Thomas is, in effect, the Chief Justice. It is unsettling because, I mean, let's face it, the pendulum swings. During the Warren Court years, when Dwight Eisenhower appointed Governor Warren as Chief Justice for a couple of decades, it was very progressive. All these big decisions, criminal defendants' rights and civil rights and so on. And, nobody was saying, oh, let's, Nixon's president now, let's pack the court. So I think the American public is going to have a problem with expanding it. I mean, and it's interesting that people are focusing on this. I mean, who even thought about it before this? Everybody probably assumed, God once said, after he created the earth in 7 days, 9 people on the Supreme Court. Well, no, that's not the case. It's shifted from like 7 to 15 over the last few centuries. But when FDR tried to do it in the 30s, he had control of the Congress, but they still called him on it. And they said, no, it's too much of a power grab. But he achieved an objective. The justices on the Supreme Court in the 30s who were rejecting the New Deal laws, all of a sudden, when they were threatened with having like the 4 or 5 or 6 more justices, they started supporting the New Deal laws, several of them. So maybe that's an objective by the Democrats that are pushing to expand the court. They know they probably can't do it because without getting rid of the filibuster, they can't do it. And they can't get rid of the filibuster without Joe Manchin and a couple of other people, sticking with the Democrat plan. So maybe the real objective here isn't necessarily to do the Hail Mary pass and get a 13-member Supreme Court. Instead, it's to send a message the Supreme Court justices, be more moderate, or your power will be diluted because you're going to have a lot more colleagues on the court.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Tamra, as it's been talked about so much over the last year, is it something that you feel excited about? The idea of like, yeah, let's get some more judges up there.
Well, I mean, I think term limits should be a larger part of the conversation, because I feel like people would be more willing to vote in favor of term limits rather than expanding the court. There's several things that we could do. I mean, term limits make sense. The fact that the justices have lifetime appointments, I mean, that's just...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
craziest...
there were many people who felt, I mean, look, it was unfortunate, obviously, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away, but I mean, she was not well in that last year, I mean, yeah. And she's not the first, you've had a number who have stayed at a point where you're like, how, what are they doing to themselves?
Should not have to do that. And yeah. And does anybody know who is our oldest justice at this point?
That's a good question.
Sure, I think probably Breyer would be your early 80s, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, so he would probably be the next one to look at, but it'd probably still be a while.
And there's pressure on him to resign.
Yeah.
Right.
So the president can replace him. There is a problem when you have lifetime appointments. Back in the 1980s, I remember being in a federal court, and the judge was about 92 or 93, and he was asleep. And we didn't know if we should whisper and say, and Your Honor, the point I'm trying to make, or should we pound the Your Honor, the big point we've got is this. We didn't know what to do. We were looking at the clerk, and the clerk was shrugging his shoulders. It's a problem.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And by the way, Dominicus Saxon agrees with Tamra on term limits. We talk a lot about term limits on here, especially for senators and House Representatives. I mean, there's when you can be somewhere for 30, 40 years and that's not even, record breaking. You should have some self-respect and not want to spend that much time in Washington. You should want to do something else. You should try to be able to better the country by not serving it for so long. But I mean, I understand, the argument of, why they would be given lifetime appointments. I think it was suggested when perhaps the life expectancy was not quite so long. And the idea that, you don't want people to be pressured and to maybe rule against their best interests for their own sake, which, I mean, senators and representatives do that all the time. They're voting for stuff just for the political expediency. So, yeah, I mean, I can see why we don't have it, but boy, there seems like there should be something. I don't know. It's like, should you have to take a competency test, for a driver's license? It's like, if you're 93 and you're really sharp as a tack, great. But
I don't think they'd be able to survive the wait at the DMV if you made them take that test. True. On your point there, Christian, David Souter, the justice appointed by George Bush Sr., it was an example of why we should give lifetime appointments. The idea is that if it's lifetime, you're totally separated from the political maelstrom and influences. You are on your own and you can do what you really think is right. And he went from conservative and appointed by a right of center president to one of the most liberal, articulate spokesmen for a progressive standpoint on the court for many years. And I think it was because he had total freedom. He knew he wasn't going to be replaced. He wasn't going to be out of there, after 4 or 6 years. So there's that argument, but then you do get into the sleeping judge syndrome.
I mean, there's been some speculation that Kavanaugh may surprise us in certain things. And by the way, Amy Coney Barrett, also 3 names.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but for a different reason, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, that's true. And by the way, Storage Yard Resident says, but no term limits for President Trump. Perhaps you haven't heard, but he was limited to 1 term. Gideon 0297, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thanks, Christian. The fastest way to get your comment on the screen is to compliment me. You can compliment everyone, but especially if you put my name in it, that'll get your comment right there on the screen. So anyway, it was just a lot of stuff that I thought that I'd sort of been wondering for a while, Royal. We'll trade emails and whatnot, but I was glad we were able to have you on the show and talk about all that stuff. In terms of a couple of other sort of more big picture things I wanted you to weigh in on, Royal, we're all three of us are in Southern California, and we're all a few weeks away from what they're promising as the reopening of June 15th. And, I was telling you before we started, we're all looking to be able to go to baseball games without it being as much of a hassle. Tamra, you went to the vaccinated section when last we saw you on the show. You hadn't gone yet, and you posted about it. But tell our audience how that went for you, going to sit in the vaccinated section.
I like the fact that the vaccinated section exists, and that's why I wanted to sit there. I also thought, because I know in the other stadiums where, or the rest of the stadium where the seats are sectioned off, you have to stay in your seats. I like to move around in regular times. And so I thought the vaccinated section would be just give me a little bit more freedom that way. But they packed us in like sardines. I did not think that there would be a person in every single seat, and that's exactly what it was like, which is frustrating enough because you're standing up every 3 minutes to let somebody in or out of your row. But then to be doing that and looking out at the entire rest of the stadium that is like completely wide open, it was just like, oh, this was a bad idea. I'm not doing the vaccinated section next time.
Well, but the whole stadium is going to be like that on June 15th. They've sold tickets up until this specifically the Dodgers through June 14th. They've sold already, and that's the first game in a series against the Phillies, and then the rest of the season's going on sale. And my understanding is that that's full capacity. So
yeah, but see, in normal times, you can move that. That stadium's big enough that the seats where we were sitting in the vaccinated section in normal times, those seats, nobody's sitting there. It's the outer reserve that nobody sits in those seats. But the fact that they kept this vaccinated section to just this tiny quarter. That was,
and the question is, did you have to show your little vaccination card, or did they want to see people's tests? Because I've heard of events where they don't even really check. So that's good to know that that at least if they're going to do that. And look, there's the consideration that might actually be the only way that, like an indoor venue like the Forum, which is really just for concerts, that the only way that they'll be able to do that at full capacity is if they have the tests and the vaccination cards. So I was wondering if they did that. So that's good to know.
You know, what I think is, if you got your vaccinations in Dodger Stadium at the parking lot, they should have given you box seats. But just me.
Well,
I got my shots at Dodger Stadium.
They weren't giving away box seats, but I know in New York at both Yankee Stadium and Citi Field, which is where the Mets play, they were actually giving away tickets for people because they're trying to get people. It's like, look, we got all the shots, come on out. You had Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, explaining that you could get free French fries from Shake Shack, which. If you weren't going to get a shot now, what about fries? So,
makes a difference. When Tamara was talking about wanting to get up and move around, it reminded me of an incident at Dodger Stadium years ago. We were sitting, I don't know, about 15 rows up from the field in the lowest level, but 15 rows up behind the Dodger dugout. So we saw the front rows there easily, and there was Larry King. And apparently he had 6 or 8 seats every single game. And of course, Larry King, you're watching him, you know everything he's doing. Without exaggeration, he did not stay seated more than 2 batters the entire game. He was up working the crowd, going down below to the fancy restaurant, back and forth, talking to the ushers. He was constantly on the move. He was like a shark. And so, Tamara, you weren't able to do that out in the vaccinated section. You couldn't play Larry King.
No, unfortunately. I saw one time at a game. Never mind. I'm blanking on their names, but it was CNN news, CNN personality and
Wolf Blitzer.
No, and
just a guess.
And oh my God, I'm blank. I can't. And then the actor from Arrested Development.
Jason Bateman.
It was Jason Bateman, and I can't.
I need a buzzer, Christian.
Yeah, I know you. I have a bell upstairs, but I didn't bring it down. So,
darn it!
Anyway.
Were they just sitting, or?
Yeah, they were friends, and they were sitting right up close. But I thought, well, that's an odd couple. I wouldn't expect the two of them hanging out.
Well, since people tuned in for baseball stadium memories, do remember there was it was like an afternoon game. This is obviously going way back, but Charlie Sheen and Bret Michaels, the lead singer of Poison, they had bought all the seats in an entire section. Ooh. So you couldn't sit there because they bought all the seats, and it was just the two of them, and they were just trying to catch foul ball,
stretching
home run
out.
balls.
Wow!
And they just wanted home run ball, and I believe they didn't catch any. But
that's pretty funny. Right,
because
I love that they did that.
In terms of like the list of things Charlie Sheen's wasted his money on, that's not even in like the top 100. So
I'll give you one more baseball story because it's just stuck with me all these years. Back in the Rodney King trial days in the 1990s, I got to know one of the lawyers for one of the Rodney King cops. His name was Ira Salzman, and he was on television every day because he was, Sergeant Stacy Coon's lawyer, and everybody knew him. So we go to the Angels game, and without exaggeration, it was like going to a game with Tom Cruise. I mean, everybody was staring. Everybody was coming up and talking to him, shaking his hand. I'm sure a bunch of people hated him, but there were a lot of people who came, and it was just the weirdest sensation to be completely invisible. And here was this guy, and he wasn't Tom Cruise. He was Ira Salzman, lawyer on TV. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure Jason Bateman and the CNN guy were getting the same treatment.
The only year I ever went to CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, back when it was still in Virginia, was 2008. And I met up with my friend Andrew Breitbart, who most people know who he was. And I was talking to him, and I just realized that in that room, it was like standing next to Paul McCartney. And he couldn't cross the room without people stopping to talk to him. And he talked to everybody, I mean, people who knew him just outside of politics. You want to talk about a guy who loved baseball, by the way, Andrew Breitbart. Just, to be in that room, I was like, I just leaned into him at one point. It's like, I'll catch up with you later, because I was never going to get anywhere. There wasn't anybody who wanted to talk to me. I was only there to possibly take a picture of someone. And, after like 3 or 4 of them, I'm like, is this really the best use of my time? I think there's an open bar over there. So, let's, so I mean, it is interesting, obviously, that when you can be in those settings, it would be like if you were with Tamra at one of her real estate holdings that we alluded to earlier, because the villagers in that Switzerland, that region of Switzerland, you're like a celebrity out there. They all look up to you. Just to bring it all full circle. I wanted to kind of talk, I brought that up and didn't expect all the little detours, but as sort of our last thing, kind of to talk about where we're at in terms of, you hear reports from other parts of the country, people are going to Target not wearing masks, not because they're trying to make a statement or they want to start a fight, but because the policy is, hey, if you've been vaccinated, go ahead and not wear it. But of course, they're not checking. So then it's just like, oh, well, I've heard that it's open season for Karens who a year ago were also not wearing masks to Target, but that was because they felt like it was impinging their rights. But in terms of, you see these things, does it make you nervous, Tamra, that I think that there's a lot of like cautious optimism of like, oh boy, this is great. There's a lot to be excited about, but, okay. So we're going to like kind of do away with the masks kind of soon. And,
well, I was in Vegas last week and pretty much no one was wearing a mask. And I talked to a lot of people. Every time I sat at a bar, a restaurant, anywhere, sure, I would talk to everybody around me, and everybody that I talked to was vaccinated. And that city supposedly has, according to their data, has a high vaccination rate. It really didn't bother me that people weren't wearing masks because I'm vaccinated. So my whole thing through, this entire pandemic, I've said, listen to the data, listen to what the CDC says. And even when their stance on something changed based on, how we should behave outside or whatever, following what the CDC says. So I'm just staying consistent to that. The CDC says, we can relax our mask situation. But I'm still, I'm sympathetic to employees that would prefer for people to wear masks and don't want to have to, don't have to have the confrontation. I do think that the confrontations are going to go down, though, because of the fact that those crazy people, the Karens and whoever, they just wanted the confrontation. I really don't think they cared one way or another. So now that they, can go around without masks, the sort of the fun, what they were looking for has been taken out of the equation. So,
well, it is a relief. We talked about last week, the Costco employee who, got into a fight with Ricky Schroeder and just explaining what the rules were when it's not the rules anymore. And then, it's just like, all right, so that interaction is taken away. If Ricky Schroeder wants to walk around Costco, no, clearly he's there for the samples. But if Ricky Schroeder wants to walk around Costco without a mask on, nobody's going to have to get in front of him. Maybe they'll ask him to sign their DVDs of season 4 of Silver Spoons or season 8 of NYPD Blue. Just depends on where you know him from, but that's not the point. And I think that, a lot of people who work in the service industry, I can understand because of their contact with people. I can understand their nervousness, and I would never fault any employee, or I think going forward for really years to come, if you see somebody in public in a mask, I think, okay, you know what? You don't know what their story is. You don't know who's at home. You don't know, are they immunocompromised? Do they have a relative who is? Do they have a child who is? And so, in the same way that I don't think that I would ever be the one to tell somebody to put on a mask. I'm like, well, there's signs to do that. I would certainly never tell someone to take off a mask, regardless of the setting. But Royal, how do you feel as we're sort of heading into, even considering where we were, sure, a year ago, but even a few months ago, at the end of last year, where California was in particular, are you at all skeptical, or do you feel like, all right, well, it's, or do you have the skeptical view that, well, somebody's about to have a recall election, so he's going to try and make people as happy as possible?
Well, I think, with the light is there at the end of the tunnel. I think you feel good about the approaching herd immunity and so on. And it's hard to imagine people, freaking out much longer about not wearing masks in public. I think the issues are kind of shifting to some sort of specialty concepts like kids. I see a lot of stuff about how it's child abuse to force children to be wearing masks. And maybe they're right. I mean, the scientists say that it's virtually impossible for kids to either get it or transmit it. But so there's that issue. Then there's the issue about going back to work. I was reading recently that a bunch of companies are now saying, well, if you're really serious about your job, you're going to come back. Even though they probably are going to have to give people the option to either work at home or work at home a few days a week. So I think we're probably going to be seeing a different focus with those issues. But I mean, overall, it's great news. And you sort of alluded to the Newsom recall thing. The Republicans are claiming that Newsom is starting to shovel out buckets full of money because we've got this nice surplus in California to make everybody feel good about what is happening in the state. And to the extent things are going to look much better over the next few months, maybe the already slim chances of recalling Newsom are going to be really dim. Although somebody was saying the other day, former LA mayor and Speaker of the Assembly Villaraigosa is thinking about putting his hat into the ring to challenge Newsom. And if he does that, he could draw a lot of people into the no column on yes or no on Newsom who would like the idea of Villaraigosa becoming governor. But other than that, the Democrats in power, I think, are basically saying ixnay on the alternatives to Newsom on the Democrat side. Just let the crazy Trumpsters on the right run, and Newsom should be fine.
Yeah, and also, it's if he were to be replaced, you'd have to run again in a year. So somebody like Villaraigosa might want to wait another year to take his shot. But yeah, I think that's a point that I think we're seeing. And look, there's New York, their governor certainly has gotten a lot of attention that he wouldn't want. So there were some thoughts there, skepticism about some of the reopenings there. I kind of alluded to it about like concerts and things. There's this term that gets thrown out there a lot that has never been proposed by elected officials, the vaccine passport. Ron DeSantis in Florida passed legislation banning vaccine passports. They don't exist, but he's making sure that they don't. What do you think, Royal, in terms of, from a rights issue about making people prove that they've either tested negative or have gotten a vaccine before they come to an event, before they get on an airplane.
Yeah, I think that is something that people are going to resist, and politicians are going to follow the lead of public opinion surveys. I think to the extent we get to the herd immunity and protect the most vulnerable people, the senior citizens, I think there's going to be a lot of resistance as the problem sort of goes away to having some sort of institutional, show us your papers in order to get into the Rams game.
Yeah, but I actually saw somebody walking around my neighborhood. He had sort of gotten, when you have like a laminate because you have like World Series or Super Bowl tickets. He had his vaccination card in there. This is going back like a month and a half when, so basically he was walking around without a mask. But this was to say it's like in Wayne's World when they go backstage. It's like, no, I'm good. You see this? So, I mean, there's something to be said for just putting it out there and like, look, I don't even need to have the conversation. I've got this, and they did actually want to see it the last time I went into Krispy Kreme for my free donut. And fortunately, I had taken a photo of it because I don't carry it around. And they figured that was good enough. But, to sort of end on this, Tamra, I don't know. Personally, I think if, an event being held that is, an optional event wants you to prove that you don't have the disease, going something recreational like a sporting event or, I wouldn't want, I think we said this before on the show. I wouldn't want to hear that like supermarkets or, even Target or places like that are making you prove it. But I think if it's something like that, especially something, Dodger Stadium holds 55,000 people, that's a lot of liability or lawsuits that they would like to avoid. I haven't heard that that's something that they're planning, but I could understand it. What do you think about the idea? Maybe they're not actual vaccine passports, but what do you think about the idea of are you vaccinated? Can you prove it?
Yeah, I agree. I like the incentivizing. I think we're doing Hamilton is doing an all vaccinated some shows coming up, promotions for that. So I like the things that it's like. Yeah, exactly. Like you shouldn't have to prove that you've been vaccinated to live your life, go to the grocery store, go run errands, go to the gas station, and anything that you need to do. But, I've even heard that private universities are requiring students to be vaccinated. So I guess if it's a private entity and they're requiring people to be vaccinated, then, that's their right to do so. I don't think we would ever have just like a universal federal mandate or even certainly not state mandate to be vaccinated. But I'm all for the vaccine incentives. I think that's a great idea.
So you mean beyond free French fries from Shake Shack? You think that might not be enough?
Fries are great. Donuts are great. Any incentive, big or small, I'm all favor of.
I will say I'm surprised that airlines have not done this. I don't know that
one of those things. That's one of those things that you can't. People will need to fly, and I think if an airline started to do that, that would be problematic. That would be impeding on people's.
Well, or maybe they take.
Although it would be pretty hilarious if not unvaccinated people were forced to take the train. Like that becomes like, you want to live in the 1800s? Here you go.
Or maybe they'll take your vaccinated section at Dodger Stadium and basically put wings on it and put it up in the air. And they're like, this is the vaccinated plane. You have to sit next to people, but it's going to cost you $8 less, and we'll let you check your check-in bag. Anyway, well, Royal, we always appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, it's always great to get some legal thoughts from someone who knows what they're talking about instead of me. But you mentioned some of the places people can find you. Remind us where we can find you and your podcast.
Sure. Well, and the main deal is, and I'm really, really proud of the podcast, it's called Too Many Lawyers. And the great thing about it is that my son, Connor, is progressive and I'm libertarian. So if you like what I have to say, you'll like the podcast. And if you like what he has to say, you'll like it because he tells me I'm full of crap on every single issue. And that's the whole idea. Millennial, progressive, baby boomer, father, son, two lawyers. So check out Too Many Lawyers wherever you get your shows.
Is he a lawyer too?
He is, yes.
Oh, that's why it's called Too Many Lawyers.
There you go.
I'm going to check it out.
Took us months to dream it up, but we finally did.
Well, no, and that's great. And you said it's available everywhere. Where
Apple, Spotify, Revolver, wherever folks get their shows.
Well, hopefully we are able to have you back on before too long. And, I know that you're going to be retiring soon. So then, as I was joking with you before we started, that opens you up for the very important weekday day games of baseball, which are a lot harder to do when you have to be in court.
Looking forward to it. Always a pleasure to talk to both of you.
And Tamra, I know people can find you on TikTok. It's right there. Hey, Tamra. Yep. But you're also on other platforms. But does that have the underscore?
On Twitter is the only one. Add Hey Tamra underscore on Twitter. Hey Tamra everywhere else.
Have you ever approached the person who has Hey Tamra on Twitter and being like, come on?
That account doesn't exist. It's been deleted and I still can't have Hey Tamra.
Well, you can find me at Christian DMZ on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to the Bladtcast YouTube network. You can get this show. And of course, we have Marvel Movie Talk. And on Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, we'll be talking about Hulu's new show, Marvel's MODOK. And we're being joined by the showrunner, Jordan Blum, and we will talk about that show. That is Friday at 2 Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. And, of course, we have the Blattcast, which we've been doing for way too long, and we will have a new episode that tomorrow at, about 24 hours from right now, noon Pacific time. You'll see Will, Jeff, and I talking about movies and whatnot, including a movie that I saw an early screening of, and I am still under embargo and cannot talk about, Cruella de Vil. I think it's just called Cruella. And boy, I have some thoughts, but they're all in my head for right now. So join us when I can talk about that. And join us all again next week. Hopefully we'll be able to have Scott join us again. And Royal, as I said, hopefully we'll get to see you soon.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week.